Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. Foundations. Levi Westbrook had built Mirage Resorts from nothing but a vision and relentless determination. The son of a construction worker and a waitress from rural Nevada, Levi learned early that power was something you seized, not something you were given. At 16, he was working construction sites, studying blueprints during lunch breaks. By 20, he'd saved enough to buy his first foreclosed property, a dilapidated motel on the outskirts of Las Vegas. He renovated it himself, working 18-hour days until his hands bled. "You'll kill yourself before you make it," his father had warned. "Then I'll die trying," Levi had replied, the desert dust clinging to his sweat-drenched shirt. Levi transformed that eyesore into the first Mirage Inn. 5 years and 12 properties later, he secured his first major investor. By 35, Mirage Resorts became the fastest-growing luxury hospitality brand in the country, with Levi's name whispered in boardrooms with equal parts respect and fear. The public knew little about Levi Westbrook. He stayed out of the spotlight, creating an enigma that only fueled speculation. Financial magazines called him the ghost developer, present everywhere but seen nowhere. His properties bore the Mirage brand, never his name. It was a strategic choice. Anonymity was power. He met Audrey Baxter at a charity gala in Santa Barbara. She was the daughter of California real estate tycoon Preston Baxter, a competitor Levi had long admired. Audrey possessed a refined elegance that came from old money and exclusive education, the polish Levi knew he lacked despite his success. "You're the only man here who looks completely unimpressed by all this pomp," she'd said, approaching him on the terrace where he'd escaped the crowd. "I'm more impressed by what people build than what they inherit," he'd replied, not recognizing her yet. She'd laughed instead of taking offense. "Then you must be thoroughly unimpressed with me." Their courtship was swift, passionate. Audrey represented everything Levi had worked for, acceptance into a world that had once seemed unreachable. Preston Baxter initially disapproved. "Self-made men are unpredictable," he'd warned his daughter. "They have something to prove." Levi proved himself by expanding the Baxter portfolio through a strategic partnership. The marriage followed 6 months later, a calculated merger as much as a union of hearts. For 3 years, they appeared the perfect power couple. Levi continued his expansion, keeping his growing empire structured through shell companies and private holdings. Few connected the rising Mirage brand to him personally, a separation of identity that would later prove invaluable. Audrey brought connections, social standing, and a veneer of sophistication to their partnership. But beneath the surface, fault lines were forming. When pregnancy talk arose, Audrey hesitated. "I'm not ready to sacrifice my body or my freedom," she'd stated plainly. Levi, who'd grown up in a house too small for his dreams, had always envisioned a family. But he conceded, focusing instead on building his empire. That empire would become his legacy. By their 5th anniversary, the distance between them had grown palpable. Audrey spent more time at her family's Malibu compound than their penthouse. Her mother, Vivian Baxter, encouraged the separation. "He may have money now, dear, but he'll never truly be one of us," Vivian would say, not realizing her driver was one of Levi's most loyal employees, a man whose medical bills Levi had covered when no one else would help. Levi heard everything but said nothing. He'd learned long ago that information was currency, and he was accumulating wealth in more ways than one. Chapter 2. Cracks in the Foundation. The invitation to spend a week at the newly constructed Mirage Sapphire Cove Resort came from Audrey, which surprised Levi. They hadn't vacationed together in over a year. "Mother thinks we should present a united front for the summer season," Audrey explained over a rare dinner together. "The Baxters should be seen enjoying the best properties on the coast." Levi studied his wife's perfectly composed features, noting how she referred to the Baxter name as though he didn't share it. The resort she'd selected was indeed one of his most ambitious projects, a sprawling beachfront property in a secluded cove that had cost him over $200 million to develop. What Audrey didn't know was that this particular resort held special significance. Sapphire Cove had been purchased from a developer who'd gone bankrupt attempting to build on the challenging terrain. That developer had been backed by Preston Baxter, who'd pulled funding at the first sign of trouble, leaving dozens of local contractors unpaid. Levi had stepped in anonymously, settled the debts, and won the loyalty of the entire coastal community. He'd built the resort using those same contractors, paying them generously. "It's a beautiful property," Levi said carefully. "Your mother will approve." "She's bringing Reed," Audrey mentioned casually, referring to Reed Hammond, her mother's personal assistant. "He's been indispensable with Daddy's health declining." Reed Hammond. The name triggered a subtle tightening in Levi's chest. The man had appeared in Vivian's orbit 18 months earlier, suspiciously soon after Levi had declined to invest in a failing Baxter development. Reed was 35, impeccably dressed, and possessed the exact pedigree that Vivian found acceptable. He'd also been spotted with Audrey at private art showings when Levi was supposedly out of town. What the Baxters didn't know was that Levi had built his empire by anticipating movements before they happened. His security team consisted of former intelligence operatives who monitored his interests with surgical precision. The reports on Audrey and Reed had been accumulating for months. Dinner reservations, hotel stays, text messages that never appeared on the phone bill Levi received. "Reed is always welcome," Levi said smoothly. "Will Preston be joining us?" Audrey's expression flickered with something. Guilt, perhaps. Daddy's treatments make travel difficult. His doctors think it's better if he stays home. Another lie. Preston Baxter's cancer was in remission, his condition stable for the past 3 months. The man had been seen golfing just the previous weekend. "That's unfortunate," Levi responded. "I'll make sure the house is fully staffed for your mother's comfort." "Our house, darling," Audrey corrected with a practiced smile. "Sometimes you speak as if these properties aren't part of our shared life." Levi reached for his wine glass. Force of habit from spending too much time in boardrooms. "Of course, it's our house." But it wasn't. None of it was. The careful legal architecture of Levi's empire ensured that. While Audrey believed their prenuptial agreement covered his assets, she had signed documents pertaining only to the public-facing portions of his wealth, perhaps 30% of the actual empire. The rest existed in structures so complex that only Levi and his most trusted advisors understood the full picture. 2 nights before the planned vacation, Levi received a call from Dominic Russo, his head of security. "Mr. Westbrook, there's been unusual activity you should be aware of." Mrs. Westbrook accessed the family safe deposit box yesterday. She removed several items, including the blue file. The blue file contained the only hard copies of their prenuptial agreements and property deeds that Audrey had access to. "Any other movements?" Levi asked, his voice betraying nothing. "She met with Gerald Winters for lunch." Gerald Winters was one of the most aggressive divorce attorneys in California. "I see," Levi said. "Implement contingency protocol Sierra." "And Dominic?" "Make sure our arrangements at Sapphire Cove are precisely as we discussed." "It's all in place, sir. The staff has been briefed. Operation Tide Pool is ready." When Levi hung up, he stood at his office window overlooking the city lights. He had built his life expecting every structure to eventually reveal its flaws. Nothing lasted forever. Not buildings, not empires, not marriages. The only question was whether you controlled the demolition or became collateral damage. He opened his safe and removed a small thumb drive labeled Endgame. Everything was in motion now. Chapter 3. The Revelation. The Sapphire Cove Resort sprawled across 50 acres of prime coastal real estate, its modernist architecture seeming to emerge organically from the cliffside. Floor-to-ceiling windows captured panoramic ocean views while reflecting pools mirrored the sky, creating an illusion of boundless blue from every angle. Their motorcade arrived with the orchestrated precision of a diplomatic entourage. Audrey had insisted they travel separately, she with her mother and Reed Hammond in the lead car, Levi following with his executive assistant and security detail. The resort's general manager, Teresa Vega, greeted them at the private entrance with a carefully calibrated display of deference. "Mrs. Westbrook, Mrs. Baxter, welcome to Sapphire Cove," she said, focusing her attention on Audrey and Vivian. "We're honored to have you with us." Vivian Baxter, a stately woman with silver hair and cold eyes, surveyed the lobby with practiced criticism. "The design is adequate, though I would have suggested more traditional elements. These modern monstrosities often age poorly." Teresa's smile never wavered. "We value your expert opinion, Mrs. Baxter. Perhaps you'd like to speak with our design team during your stay?" Levi watched the interaction with detached interest. Teresa was one of his most loyal employees, a woman who had started as a housekeeper at his first property and now ran his flagship resort. She knew exactly who signed her generous checks, and it wasn't the Baxter family. "We'd like to freshen up," Audrey announced. "I assume we're in the main house." "Of course," Teresa replied. "The presidential villa has been prepared according to your specifications. Mr. Westbrook, we've arranged your accommodation in the executive suite in the north wing, as requested." This detail, the separate accommodations, seemed to surprise Audrey momentarily before she composed herself. "That won't be necessary. My husband will be staying with us in the villa." Levi stepped forward. "Actually, I'll take the suite. I have calls scheduled with our Singapore team that will run late. I wouldn't want to disturb anyone." The presidential villa occupied the entire top floor of the central building. At 10,000 square feet with 6 bedrooms, it was designed for visiting dignitaries and celebrities seeking absolute privacy. What Audrey didn't know was that Levi had personally overseen its construction, including the installation of state-of-the-art security and monitoring systems. After settling in, they gathered on the villa's main terrace for drinks. Reed Hammond moved with the comfort of someone familiar with luxury surroundings, positioning himself subtly between Audrey and her mother. To family, Vivian proposed a toast, her eyes darting meaningfully toward Levi. "And to knowing where one belongs." "To family," they echoed. As the evening progressed, more guests arrived. Audrey's college friends Charlotte and Thomas Livingston, Vivian's younger sister Patricia, and her husband Gerald, and to Levi's carefully concealed surprise, Simon Reed, a junior partner at Gerald Winter's law firm. The dinner conversation flowed with practiced ease, touching on safe subjects, charity events, travel plans, the latest exhibition at the Getty. But underneath ran currents of tension. Levi noticed how Audrey positioned herself away from him, how Reed Hammond's hand occasionally brushed hers beneath the table, how Simon Reed studied property documents on his tablet during brief absences from the table. After dessert, Vivian cleared her throat. "I think it's time we discuss the purpose of this gathering." The table fell silent. "This house," she continued, gesturing expansively, "is magnificent, a fitting setting for family matters." She emphasized the word family with a pointed look at Levi. "And it's important that we're clear about who family is, and who is merely passing through." Levi took a slow sip of his whiskey, saying nothing. Audrey straightened. "Mother and I have been discussing our future arrangements. The Baxter holdings need restructuring with Daddy's health situation, and certain associations need to be reevaluated." "I see," Levi said calmly. "And this reevaluation includes me." "Don't be difficult, Levi," Vivian interjected. "You've had a good run with the Baxter name opening doors for you. But this house is for real family only, not opportunistic outsiders who've outlived their usefulness." A heavy silence fell over the table. Even Audrey's friends looked uncomfortable. Finally, Audrey spoke, her voice soft but firm. "Honey, just go home. We have papers being drawn up. Simon will contact you next week. There's no need to make this unpleasant." Levi set down his glass and stood slowly. The group tensed, perhaps expecting an outburst. Instead, he smiled, a cold, measured expression that never reached his eyes. He pressed a button on his watch. Within 30 seconds, Teresa Vega appeared with 4 members of the resort's security team. "Is there a problem, Mr. Westbrook?" Teresa asked. "No problem at all," Levi replied. "Just some confusion about ownership that needs clearing up. Please escort these guests out of my resort." Vivian scoffed. "Your resort? This is a Mirage property." Audrey explained the whole structure to us. "Your name isn't on anything." Levi gestured to Teresa, who produced a tablet and turned it to face the table. On screen appeared documents showing the complete ownership structure of Sapphire Cove Resort, and at the top of every page appeared the name Levi Westbrook. "Perhaps you've been misinformed," Levi said mildly. "Mirage Resorts is a subsidiary of Westbrook Holdings. Always has been." He turned to Reed Hammond, whose complexion had gone ashen. "Mr. Hammond, I believe you conducted what you thought was thorough due diligence. Did you perhaps rely on information provided by my wife rather than official records?" Reed's silence was answer enough. "What is this?" Audrey demanded, standing now. "Some kind of trick?" "No trick," Levi replied. "Just business. Teresa, please show our guests to the Sea Breeze Villa on the South Shore. It's quite comfortable, though not quite as presidential." As security began to move toward them, Simon Reed frantically scrolled through documents on his tablet. This can't be right. The holdings we reviewed clearly showed exactly what I wanted them to show, Levi interrupted. A valuable lesson in corporate structure, Mr. Reed. One your firm might benefit from studying. He turned to Audrey, his expression hardening. You have 1 hour to collect your belongings from the presidential villa. After that, the locks will be changed. Audrey's face contorted with rage. You can't do this. This is my property, Levi finished for her. And as for those special plans you mentioned, he looked directly at Vivian. I have some plans of my own. For all of you. As security began to usher the stunned group away, Levi caught Reed Hammond by the arm. You've been sleeping with my wife in houses that I own, he said quietly, so only Reed could hear. Remember that fact in the coming days. Levi remained on the terrace alone, watching the sunset over the ocean. His phone buzzed with a message from Dominic. Protocols activated. All surveillance operational. Phase 1 complete. He typed a simple reply. Begin Phase 2. Chapter 4. Betrayal Uncovered. The morning after the confrontation, Levi sat in his private office within the resort, reviewing the intel Dominic had compiled. The evidence of Audrey's betrayal was comprehensive. Not just the affair with Reed Hammond, which had begun 14 months earlier, but the systematic attempt to undermine Levi's business operations. Email exchanges showed Audrey had been feeding Hammond confidential information about Mirage Resort's expansion plans. Hammond, leveraging his position with Vivian, had then advised the Baxters on preemptive land acquisitions designed to block Levi's growth and force him into disadvantageous partnerships. They've been positioning for this divorce for at least 8 months, Dominic explained, standing rigidly by the window. A former Special Forces operative, Dominic had joined Levi's team after Levi funded a rehabilitation center for veterans. Their strategy was to control key properties, then use the leverage during settlement negotiations. Levi scrolled through financial reports showing unusual transfers from Baxter-controlled accounts to offshore entities. Have we identified the shell companies receiving these funds? 3 are linked directly to Hammond. 2 others appear connected to Simon Reed's partner at the law firm. They've been moving substantial amounts, nearly $30 million in total. What troubled Levi most wasn't the affair or even the corporate espionage. It was the realization that Preston Baxter was likely involved despite his illness. The man had been a mentor of sorts, one of the few people in the industry Levi had genuinely respected. Have we confirmed Preston's knowledge? Levi asked. Dominic hesitated before sliding across a final document. A recorded transcript of a call between Preston and Vivian from 3 months earlier. Preston, is Hammond making progress with the Westbrook situation? Vivian, Audrey's given him everything he needs. The fool built his entire empire with loans secured against properties we can control. Preston, good. I taught him everything he knows, but clearly not everything I know. It's time he learned what happens when new money forgets its place. Levi set down the transcript, a cold clarity settling over him. So this was always the plan. Use me to expand their holdings, then cut me out when I'd served my purpose. It appears so, sir. Levi turned to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the resort grounds. In the distance, he could see the Sea Breeze Villa where Audrey and her entourage had been relocated. Surveillance showed they'd been frantically making calls since dawn, attempting to counter the unexpected power shift. What's their next move? Levi asked. They've contacted 3 banks, trying to verify the ownership structure of Mirage Resorts. They've also reached out to your competitors at Platinum Hospitality Group. This wasn't surprising. Platinum had been trying to acquire Mirage properties for years, always rebuffed by Levi's refusal to sell. Their CEO, Mason Phillips, had a reputation for aggressive takeovers of distressed assets. And Gerald Winters? His firm is preparing emergency injunctions based on marital property claims. They'll likely file by end of day, attempting to freeze operations at all Mirage properties pending court review. Levi nodded, having anticipated this tactic. Contact Judge Abernathy. Remind him of our discussion regarding his daughter's rehabilitation facility. Judge William Abernathy's daughter had struggled with addiction for years. When no facility would accept her due to previous relapses, Levi had personally arranged her admission to an exclusive treatment center in Switzerland, ensuring absolute privacy for the family. Already done, sir. He's prepared to hear any emergency motions. Good. Levi turned from the window. Now, tell me about Hammond. What's his vulnerability? Dominic smiled thinly. Several interesting findings there. Despite his carefully cultivated image, Reed Hammond comes from considerably humble origins. His real name is Richard Hamlin. He changed it after leaving his hometown in Idaho, where his father still works as a janitor at the local high school. That doesn't sound particularly useful, Levi noted. No, but this is. Before joining Vivian Baxter's staff, he worked briefly for Trident Security Consultants, the same firm that handles digital security for the Baxter family. During that time, he installed backdoor access points in their systems that he's been using to monitor their communications. Levi raised an eyebrow. He's spying on the Baxters while sleeping with their daughter? Yes, and he's been systematically copying financial documents, apparently building leverage for his own purposes. Interesting. Levi considered this development. So Hammond isn't just Audrey's lover. He's playing his own game. It appears so. And there's more. He's been in regular contact with Mason Phillips at Platinum Hospitality. The picture was becoming clearer. Hammond was positioning himself as the catalyst for a hostile takeover, using Audrey to access Levi's supposed vulnerabilities while simultaneously preparing to betray the Baxters to their corporate rivals. What about Audrey? Does she know about Hammond's connection to Platinum? Dominic shook his head. All evidence suggests she believes they're planning a future together once the divorce is settled. She's transferred nearly $2 million to accounts he controls. Levi absorbed this information silently. The betrayal was even more calculated than he'd initially thought. A multi-layered deception with Audrey, the Baxters, and Levi himself all serving as pawns in Hammond's scheme. Sir, Dominic said quietly, there's one more thing you should know. During our surveillance, we discovered that Hammond has been physically abusive toward Audrey on at least 3 occasions. The incidents occurred after she questioned certain financial moves he recommended. This detail landed differently, stirring something unexpected in Levi. Despite everything, the thought of Audrey being harmed produced a visceral response. He quickly suppressed it. Document everything, he instructed. Continue monitoring their communications. I want to know their next move before they do. After Dominic left, Levi unlocked a hidden compartment in his desk and removed a worn leather journal, his first business ledger from the original Mirage Inn. He'd kept it as a reminder of where he'd started and what he'd overcome. Inside the journal's cover was a faded photograph of his parents standing outside their small Nevada home. They'd never lived to see his success, both claimed by an accident on an icy highway when Levi was 23. Their only legacy had been their unwavering belief in him and the work ethic they'd instilled. You were right, Dad, Levi murmured to the photograph. Trust is a luxury I can't afford. He closed the journal and returned it to its hiding place. Then he opened his laptop and initiated a sequence of commands that would activate financial protocols established years earlier, precisely for a scenario like this. Operation Undertow had begun. Chapter 5. The Architect of Vengeance. 3 days after relocating Audrey and her entourage to the Sea Breeze Villa, Levi arranged a meeting with Teresa Vega at the resort's most isolated dining terrace. The evening sky burned orange and crimson as the sun descended toward the Pacific. They're growing restless, Teresa reported, sliding surveillance photos across the table. The images showed Audrey pacing the villa's terrace, Hammond hunched over a laptop, and Vivian on the phone, her expression furious. Mrs. Baxter has demanded to speak with the regional manager 3 times today. And what did you tell her? Levi asked, sampling the rare whiskey he'd requested. That all management decisions come directly from the owner. Teresa replied with a slight smile. She didn't appreciate the reminder. Levi nodded approvingly. Teresa had been with him since the beginning, one of the few people who knew the full extent of his contingency planning. Her loyalty had been earned through actions, not contracts. When her mother had fallen ill 5 years earlier, Levi had not only covered all medical expenses, but established a specialized care facility in her hometown, disguised as a Mirage corporate investment. Have they attempted to leave the property? Twice. Both times they found their vehicles unavailable. The first time, their cars had mysteriously developed electrical problems. The second time, a sudden road closure for emergency maintenance had blocked the only exit route. Their electronic communications? Levi inquired. Limited to what we allow, Teresa confirmed. Their calls and messages are being selectively delayed or dropped. Nothing critical enough to raise suspicions of deliberate interference, but enough to create frustration and isolation. This strategic isolation was critical to Levi's plan. While Audrey and her allies believed they were experiencing technical difficulties due to the resort's remote location, they were actually being contained within a carefully controlled environment. Their communications monitored, their movements tracked, their growing sense of powerlessness by design. "What about our other guests?" Levi asked. "All VIPs have been relocated to our sister property in La Jolla, with complimentary upgrades. The resort is effectively empty except for essential staff and our targets." Levi considered his next move. "It's time for Phase 3. Arrange a dinner invitation for tomorrow evening. Full formal service, main dining room, 8 p.m. Extended to all of them: Audrey, Hammond, Vivian, the Livingstons, Patricia and Gerald, and Simon Reed." "They'll be suspicious," Teresa noted. "Of course they will. Let them suspect. Uncertainty is powerful." After Teresa departed, Levi made a secure call to his contact at First Continental Bank, one of the primary lenders to the Baxter real estate portfolio. "Martin, it's time to implement our discussed measures on the Baxter accounts." Martin Foster had been a fraternity brother of Preston Baxter at Yale. He'd also been passed over for promotion 3 times due to Preston's influence, creating a resentment that Levi had carefully cultivated over the years. "The compliance team has completed their review," Martin replied formally. "Given the suspicious transaction patterns, we're initiating a 60-day freeze on all Baxter-controlled business accounts pending further investigation." "The timing is unfortunate," Levi commented with false sympathy. "Yes, especially with those loan payments coming due next week. Without access to operating accounts, they'll technically be in default by Monday." This was the first domino in a sequence Levi had arranged years earlier. The Baxter empire, while substantial, was heavily leveraged, a fact that Preston had always disguised through complex financial engineering. One missed payment would trigger cross-default provisions across their portfolio. "Keep me informed of any developments," Levi said before ending the call. His next call was to Catherine Zhao, CEO of New Century Holdings, a Chinese investment conglomerate that had been seeking entry into premium U.S. hospitality markets. "Ms. Zhao, this is Levi Westbrook. I believe my team discussed a potential opportunity regarding the Baxter properties in Malibu and Palm Springs." "Mr. Westbrook," Catherine responded with interest. "Yes, your representative mentioned potential distressed assets becoming available. We're very interested, particularly in the oceanfront parcels. I've just received information that the properties may be coming to market sooner than anticipated. If you could have your acquisition team ready to move quickly, say, within the next 72 hours, there might be an opportunity for preferential terms." After finalizing arrangements with Catherine, Levi contacted 6 other strategic investors, each unaware of the others, each positioned to acquire specific pieces of the Baxter portfolio once the defaults began. By midnight, Levi had set in motion financial mechanisms that would dismantle the Baxter empire with surgical precision. Preston had taught him the art of leveraged acquisition, a lesson Levi had studied more thoroughly than his mentor realized. Later, in his private suite, Levi reviewed the day's surveillance. One video captured his attention: Audrey alone on the villa's terrace, staring out at the ocean, tears streaming down her face. For a moment, his resolve wavered. Despite everything, there had been real feeling between them once. The moment passed when another video appeared: Hammond consoling Audrey, his arm around her shoulders while his other hand typed a message to Mason Phillips, proceeding as planned. "She suspects nothing." Levi closed the laptop. Whatever they had once shared had been sacrificed to ambition and deceit. Now only the architecture of vengeance remained, a structure he had designed with the same meticulous attention he gave his resorts. Tomorrow's dinner would begin the final phase. Not just retribution, but complete decimation. Chapter 6: Dinner and Deception. The main dining room of Sapphire Cove Resort had been transformed for the evening's performance. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the single extended table positioned to maximize the dramatic ocean backdrop. White orchids and blue hydrangeas created an elegant centerpiece, while silver service gleamed against crisp linen. At precisely 7:55 p.m., Levi entered through the private door behind what would be his seat at the head of the table. He wore a custom Tom Ford tuxedo, Not his usual attire, but appropriate for the role he would play tonight. This was theater as much as business. Teresa appeared at his side. "They're approaching, sir." Mrs. Westbrook initially refused the invitation, but Mr. Hammond convinced her to attend. "And our special arrangements?" "All in place. Chef has prepared the menu exactly as specified, with the dietary accommodations for Mrs. Baxter's shellfish allergy. The service staff has been briefed on the timeline." "Excellent." Levi smoothed his jacket. "And our other guest?" "Arriving separately through the service entrance, as requested. He'll be positioned in the observation room until you signal." At 8 p.m. precisely, the double doors opened. Audrey entered first, stunning in a black door gown that Levi recognized from their anniversary celebration the previous year. Her posture projected confidence, but the tension around her eyes revealed her unease. Hammond followed closely, too closely for mere professional association, in a tuxedo that fit imperfectly across the shoulders. Vivian Baxter maintained a regal bearing despite the circumstances, while the others, the Livingstons, Patricia and Gerald, Simon Reed, moved with the awkward energy of supporting players unsure of their role in the unfolding drama. "Good evening." Levi greeted them with practiced warmth. "Thank you for accepting my invitation." "As if we had a choice," Vivian replied icily. "Your staff made it clear that our cooperation would determine when we might leave this gilded prison." Levi smiled. "A misunderstanding, I'm sure. Please, take your seats. We have much to discuss over dinner." The seating arrangement had been carefully planned. Levi at the head, Audrey to his right, Hammond beside her, Vivian at the far end. The others filled in between, strategically separated to minimize alliance building during the meal. As the first course arrived, a delicate sea-based crudo, Levi raised his glass. "To clarity," he offered as a toast. "May this evening bring understanding to all of us." The group exchanged uncertain glances before reluctantly raising their glasses. Throughout the appetizer and soup courses, Levi kept the conversation deliberately light, discussing resort architecture, the challenges of coastal development, the upcoming season in Aspen. His guests responded with caution, waiting for the trap they sensed but couldn't identify. The tension broke when the main course arrived, and Audrey set down her fork with deliberate force. "Enough games, Levi. Why are we here? What do you want?" Levi dabbed his lips with his napkin before responding. "Direct as always, Audrey." "Very well. I wanted to congratulate you all on a well-executed plan. Truly impressive in its ambition." Confused glances circulated around the table. "The systematic gathering of intelligence on my operations," Levi continued conversationally. "The positioning of assets to block my expansion. The careful preparation for what you believed would be a devastating divorce settlement." He turned to Hammond. "Even the secondary arrangement with Platinum Hospitality was inspired." Hammond's fork clattered against his plate. "I don't know what you're—" "Please," Levi interrupted. "Let's not insult each other's intelligence. I've read your emails to Mason Phillips. Quite thorough, your assessments of Mirage's vulnerabilities." Audrey turned to Hammond, her expression a mix of confusion and dawning realization. "What is he talking about? What arrangement with Platinum?" Hammond's face hardened as he reached for his water glass. "He's bluffing, trying to turn us against each other." Levi gestured to Teresa, who approached with a tablet. Perhaps some visual aids would help. She placed the tablet before Audrey, displaying a series of email exchanges between Hammond and Mason Phillips dating back 18 months, before Hammond had even met Audrey. "Target acquired," read the first message. "Proximity to A established. We'll provide regular updates on W holdings as they become available." Audrey scrolled through the correspondence, her complexion paling with each message. The final email, dated just 2 days earlier, was the most damning. "Once divorce proceedings begin, we'll have 30 to 45 days to move on primary assets before other creditors mobilize. A remains unaware of our arrangement. Her portion of settlement can be managed as discussed." "Read." Audrey's voice was barely audible. "What is this?" Hammond's expression shifted from denial to calculation. "Obviously fabricated. Westbrook is desperate." "Perhaps you'd prefer the audio recordings," Levi suggested mildly. "Or the video from the Platinum corporate retreat in Scottsdale last month. You and Phillips were quite specific about asset allocation in the aftermath of what you called the Westbrook collapse." Vivian Baxter, who had been watching the exchange with growing alarm, turned her icy gaze on Hammond. You've been working with Platinum? Against Baxter interests? Of course not, Hammond insisted. This is exactly what he wants, to divide us when we need to present a united front. Levi raised his hand, signaling Teresa again. This time she approached with a different tablet, placing it before Vivian. Mrs. Baxter, you might find these documents relevant. They detail the systematic transfer of funds from Baxter-controlled accounts to offshore entities over the past 14 months. As Vivian reviewed the documents, her composed facade began to crack. These are internal transfers. Authorized by, her voice faltered. By you, Levi finished for her. Or rather, by someone using your authorization codes. The same codes Mr. Hammond had access to as your personal assistant. The table fell into stunned silence as the implications settled. But that's impossible, Vivian finally said. The total amounts here are substantial. Nearly $30 million, Levi confirmed. Carefully distributed across multiple accounts to avoid triggering compliance alerts. Quite sophisticated. Hammond's composure was deteriorating rapidly. This is absurd. I've done nothing but look after Baxter family interests. Like you looked after my interests? Audrey asked, her voice gaining strength as shock gave way to anger. Was anything real, Reed? Or was I just your access point to Levi's business? Before Hammond could respond, Simon Reed cleared his throat nervously. Perhaps we should adjourn to discuss these allegations privately. This venue seems inappropriate for such sensitive matters. Levi smiled coldly. But we're just getting to the interesting part, Mr. Reed. For instance, your firm's involvement in establishing the shell companies that received those Baxter funds. Companies that, coincidentally, list your brother-in-law as a director. Simon blanched. That's confidential client information. Yes, attorney-client privilege is sacred, Levi agreed. Which makes it particularly problematic when an attorney participates in criminal conspiracy. The Bar Association tends to take a dim view of such activities. As the accusations mounted, the alliances at the table visibly fractured. Audrey moved her chair away from Hammond. Vivian stared at Simon Reed with undisguised contempt. The Livingstons whispered urgently to each other, clearly regretting their peripheral involvement. What do you want? Vivian finally demanded. If this is about money. This isn't about money, Levi interrupted. This is about consequences. He pressed a button on a small remote, causing a screen to descend from the ceiling at the end of the dining room. I've invited someone to join us for this part of the discussion. The screen flickered to life, revealing Preston Baxter in what appeared to be a hospital room. His once powerful frame had been diminished by illness, but his eyes remained sharp. Preston, Vivian gasped. What is this? Hello, Vivian, Preston responded, his voice stronger than his appearance suggested. Levi has been sharing some disturbing information with me. You can't possibly believe, Vivian began. I've seen the evidence, Preston cut her off. All of it. The unauthorized transfers. The conspiracy with Hammond. The attempt to dismantle my life's work for your personal gain. Vivian's face contorted with rage. Your life's work? The empire I helped you build while you chased every young assistant who caught your eye? Don't pretend this is about loyalty, Preston. The rawness of her response silenced the room. Even Levi, who had orchestrated this confrontation, was momentarily taken aback by the depth of bitterness it revealed. Preston's expression hardened. As of 2 hours ago, I have removed you as trustee from all Baxter family interests. The board of Baxter Holdings has called an emergency meeting for tomorrow morning to address the financial irregularities. You can't do that, Vivian sputtered. The voting shares have been reallocated, Preston finished for her. The documents were filed this afternoon. Levi watched the color drain from Vivian's face as the full implications became clear. Without control of the Baxter voting shares, she was effectively powerless within the empire she had helped build. And as for you, Preston continued, turning his attention to Hammond, security has already cleared your office. The authorities have been notified regarding the suspicious transfers. Hammond stood abruptly. This is a setup. You have no proof that would stand up in court. Perhaps not for criminal charges, Levi conceded. But for civil action, the standard is much lower. And given the publicity this will generate, I imagine your future employment prospects will be limited. As Hammond moved toward the door, Levi added, Oh, and Mr. Hammond, or should I say Mr. Hamlin? Your father in Idaho sends his regards. Apparently, The local news there is very interested in the story of how Richard Hamlin from Twin Falls became Reed Hammond, financial manipulator to the elite. Hammond froze, his carefully constructed persona visibly crumbling. You should sit down, Levi advised. We haven't yet discussed the terms of your departure from this situation. The remainder of the dinner unfolded like the final act of a Greek tragedy. Alliances shattered, secrets exposed, futures destroyed not by external forces, but by the consequences of their own actions. By the time dessert was served, a bitter dark chocolate tart that few touched, the group that had arrived as conspirators had devolved into isolated individuals, each contemplating their separate downfalls. As coffee was poured, Levi addressed them collectively one last time. Tomorrow morning, you'll all be free to leave Sapphire Cove. Transportation has been arranged to take you wherever you wish to go. He paused, allowing the relief to briefly register before continuing. However, I should mention that certain financial difficulties may complicate your immediate plans. What financial difficulties? Simon Reed asked nervously. As of close of business today, First Continental Bank has frozen all Baxter corporate accounts pending investigation of suspicious activities, Levi explained calmly. Additionally, the quarterly payments on several key properties were due today. Without access to operating accounts, those loans are now technically in default. The implication hung in the air like poison gas. The Baxter empire operated on precisely timed cash flows between numerous entities. One missed payment could trigger a cascade of cross defaults. That's impossible, Vivian whispered. The payments are automated. Systems can be so unreliable, Levi remarked with false sympathy, especially when they're being audited for potential fraud. As the devastating reality settled over the table, Levi stood. Thank you all for a most illuminating evening. Teresa will see you back to your accommodations. Before leaving, he paused beside Audrey, who sat motionless, staring at nothing. For what it's worth, he said quietly, I believe you were as much a pawn as I was intended to be. That doesn't excuse your choices, but it may explain them. She looked up at him, tears streaming silently down her face. What happens now? Now, Levi considered the question. Now you get to experience what I've always known, that everything can be taken away in an instant. The only difference is that I built my life expecting that reality. You never had to. With that, he walked away, leaving behind the ruins of the life they had constructed together and the people who had sought to destroy him. Chapter 7: Empire Falls. The financial collapse of the Baxter Empire unfolded with the terrible precision of a controlled demolition. By noon the day after the fateful dinner, news of the frozen accounts and missed loan payments had spread through financial circles. By close of business, Baxter Holdings stock had dropped 27%, triggering circuit breakers that temporarily halted trading. Levi monitored the devastation from his office at Sapphire Cove, where multiple screens displayed financial news channels, real-time stock tickers, and private intelligence feeds from strategically placed sources. Dominic entered with the latest updates. The New Century Holdings Consortium has submitted letters of intent for the Malibu and Palm Springs properties. Their initial offer is 30 cents on the dollar, with expedited closing. Levi nodded approvingly. And the Vegas parcels? Gulf Sovereign Wealth Fund is preparing a bid. They're coordinating with their U.S. regulatory team to fast-track approvals. The systematic dismantling continued throughout the day. Properties that the Baxter family had accumulated over 3 generations were being carved up and redistributed to buyers Levi had carefully cultivated. Buyers who understood the value of discretion and the advantage of acquiring distressed assets at unprecedented discounts. What about Preston? Levi asked. Dominic's expression shifted slightly. He's been admitted to Cedars-Sinai. The stress appears to have triggered complications with his condition. This news landed differently than Levi had anticipated. Preston's betrayal had cut deepest precisely because Levi had genuinely respected the man. The mentor who had become an adversary had never been the primary target of his vengeance. Make sure he receives the best care, Levi instructed. Anonymously. Of course. Dominic hesitated before continuing. There's another development you should be aware of. Mrs. Westbrook attempted to access her personal accounts this morning. They were denied. Levi raised an eyebrow. All of them? Yes. It appears her name has been flagged in the banking system due to the ongoing fraud investigation. Even her personal credit cards have been suspended. This was an unexpected consequence, collateral damage rather than deliberately inflicted punishment. Audrey had her flaws, but financial impropriety hadn't been among them. The funds she had transferred to Hammond had been her own inheritance from her maternal grandmother, kept separate from Baxter family assets. "Where is she now?" Levi asked. "Still at the Sea Breeze Villa. The others have departed." Hammond left before dawn. The Livingstons and Simon Reed took the morning shuttle to the airport. Mrs. Baxter was collected by her sister Patricia. Only Mrs. Westbrook remains. Levi considered this information. Has she made any calls? Several. To her personal attorney, to various friends, to her banker. None have been returned. The isolation Audrey was experiencing mirrored what Levi had felt in his early years, when deals fell through, when investors backed out, when doors closed because he lacked the right name or connections. The difference was that he had built calluses over those wounds. Audrey had never developed such protection. "Continue monitoring her situation," Levi instructed. "Ensure she has access to meals and basic services." Dominic nodded, recognizing the subtle shift in Levi's approach without commenting on it. As the afternoon progressed, reports flooded in of creditors moving against Baxter assets nationwide. What had begun as targeted financial pressure had evolved into a feeding frenzy as financial institutions rushed to secure their positions against the collapsing conglomerate. At 4:30 p.m., Levi received a call from Catherine Zhao at New Century Holdings. "Mr. Westbrook, we've encountered an unexpected complication," she began without preamble. "Another investor group has entered the bidding for the Malibu properties with a significantly higher offer." "Platinum Hospitality," Levi stated rather than asked. "Yes," Catherine confirmed. "They're offering 45 cents on the dollar, with similar expedited terms." Levi had anticipated this move. Mason Phillips wouldn't abandon his strategy simply because his inside man had been compromised. If anything, Hammond's exposure would accelerate Phillips' timeline. "Match their offer with the same terms," Levi instructed. "Then contact Judge Williams at the Coastal Commission. Remind him of the environmental concerns we discussed regarding Platinum's development approach." The Coastal Commission had been a persistent obstacle for Platinum's previous projects, with environmental approvals repeatedly delayed due to concerns about habitat disruption and public access. Judge Williams, who chaired the commission, had a particular interest in marine conservation, an interest Levi had supported through substantial anonymous donations to the judge's foundation. "Understood," Catherine replied. "And if they counter? They won't get the chance. By morning, the commission will have announced a special review of all pending applications for the affected coastal parcels. That will delay any transaction long enough for other factors to come into play." After ending the call, Levi received an urgent message from his source at First Continental Bank. Preston Baxter had suffered a major stroke and was now in critical condition. The bank's board was meeting to discuss accelerating their actions against Baxter Holdings in anticipation of leadership uncertainty. The situation was evolving faster than even Levi had planned. What he had envisioned as a controlled implosion was becoming a chaotic collapse that threatened to destroy more than just his enemies. As evening approached, Levi left his office and walked along the cliffside path toward the Sea Breeze Villa. The setting sun painted the ocean in shades of fire, a fitting backdrop for the day's events. He found Audrey sitting alone on the villa's terrace, a half-empty bottle of wine beside her. She wore jeans and a simple blouse, a striking contrast to her usual tailored perfection. Her hair was pulled back carelessly, her face bare of makeup. She didn't look up as he approached. "Come to survey the wreckage?" she asked, her voice hollow. "To check if there are survivors," Levi replied, taking the seat across from her. "There aren't." She took another sip of wine. "My father's had a stroke. Did you know that?" "Of course you did. You probably timed it perfectly." "That wasn't part of the plan," Levi said truthfully. Audrey laughed bitterly. "There's always a plan with you, Levi. Always 10 steps ahead, contingencies for every possibility." She finally looked at him directly. "When did you stop trusting me? Or did you ever?" The question carried more weight than she likely intended. Levi considered his response carefully. "I trusted you with my heart," he finally said. "Just not with my survival. There's a difference. And now, are you satisfied?" The mighty Baxters brought low, my mother disgraced, my father dying, me penniless and abandoned. "Penniless is an exaggeration," Levi noted. "Your grandmother's trust is unaffected by all this. It's held separately from Baxter assets. Audrey looked surprised. How did you? She stopped, shaking her head. Of course you knew about that too. I know that you transferred a significant portion of those funds to Hammond. That was unwise, but the remainder is still secure. Once the banking flags are cleared, you'll have access again. Why are you telling me this? Because this was never about destroying you, Audrey. It was about consequences for choices made. She studied him with new intensity. What happens to Hammond? And Platinum? Hammond is currently on a private jet to an undisclosed location, courtesy of Mason Phillips. By morning, Phillips will have realized that Hammond's usefulness has expired. After that, Levi shrugged. The world can be unkind to men without resources or allies. And my mother? Vivian will survive. She always does, though her social position may be somewhat diminished when the details emerge. They sat in silence as darkness fell over the ocean. Staff appeared to light the terrace lanterns, moving with practiced discretion. I loved you once, Audrey said suddenly. Before everything became about power and position. Before my mother convinced me you'd always see me as your ticket into a world that would never truly accept you. And I loved you, Levi acknowledged. Before I realized I was just another acquisition for the Baxter portfolio. Another silence stretched between them, filled with the sound of waves breaking against the cliffs below. What do I do now? Audrey finally asked, vulnerability breaking through her composed exterior. Levi considered her question. Despite everything, part of him still responded to her pain. But he had learned long ago that compassion could be as dangerous as trust when misplaced. You rebuild, he said simply. Like I did. Every time a deal collapsed or an investor backed out or a property was lost. You start again, with whatever foundation remains. He stood to leave, then paused. Your car has been returned to operational status. Your personal accounts should be accessible by tomorrow. The coastal highway has been cleared of construction. Audrey looked up at him, understanding the message. She was no longer being contained. Is this mercy, Levi? No, he replied honestly. Just recognition that some debts have been paid in full. As he walked away from the villa, Levi felt a complex mixture of emotions, satisfaction at the precision of his retribution, regret for what might have been in another reality, and a cold clarity about what still remained to be done. The Baxter Empire was falling, but Mason Phillips and Platinum Hospitality still posed a threat. And Reed Hammond, despite his current desperation, remained a dangerous adversary with nothing left to lose. The final act was yet to be played. Chapter 8, The Last Betrayal. The coastal fog rolled in during the pre-dawn hours, shrouding Sapphire Cove in a spectral mist. Levi stood on the balcony of the presidential villa, watching as the resort's lights created halos in the thick air. His phone vibrated with an encrypted message from Dominic, Eagle Landing. ETA 20 minutes. Eagle was their code for Mason Phillips, CEO of Platinum Hospitality and the architect of the failed scheme to dismantle Mirage Resorts. Phillips' private jet had filed a flight plan to San Diego just after midnight, an unexpected development that Levi's intelligence network had immediately flagged. Is Hammond with him? Levi texted back. Negative. Hammond was dropped in Phoenix. Current location unknown. This was concerning. Hammond operating independently introduced an unpredictable element. But Phillips' sudden appearance presented an opportunity Levi hadn't anticipated, a chance to accelerate the final phase of his strategy. Prepare the marina suite for our guest, Levi instructed. Full surveillance, all protocols active. 20 minutes later, a black Range Rover passed through the resort's security gate. Surveillance cameras tracked its progress to the main entrance, where Mason Phillips emerged alone. The man moved with the confident swagger of someone accustomed to power, tall, athletically built, with the practiced smile of a corporate predator. Teresa greeted him with professional courtesy. Mr. Phillips, welcome to Sapphire Cove. We weren't expecting you until later this week. Change of plans, Phillips replied dismissively. I need to speak with Westbrook immediately. Of course. Mr. Westbrook has been notified of your arrival and suggests you get settled first. The marina suite has been prepared for you. Phillips frowned at this deflection, but followed Teresa toward the elevator. Fine, but tell him I expect to meet within the hour. We have urgent business to discuss. Once Phillips was installed in the suite, Levi reviewed the surveillance feed with Dominic in the security control room. He came alone, Levi observed. No legal team, no advisors. That's unusual for acquisition discussions. Perhaps this is more of a reconnaissance mission, Dominic suggested. Testing your position after the Baxter situation. Or offering a deal he doesn't want witnessed, Levi countered. What's the status on Hammond? Dominic pulled up another screen showing travel records. Last confirmed sighting was at Phoenix Sky Harbor at 2:13 a.m. He withdrew $5,000 cash from an ATM, then disappeared. He hasn't used his phone or credit card since. He's running, Levi concluded. But from Phillips or from us? Possibly both. The information we released about his real identity and background would make him toxic to Phillips now. No value as an inside man when everyone knows who and what he is. Levi considered the implications. Yet Phillips still came here personally, immediately after dropping Hammond. Why the urgency? Before Dominic could respond, the surveillance feed from the Marina suite showed Phillips making a call on what appeared to be a burner phone, not the corporate device he'd been using earlier. Can we intercept? Levi asked. Dominic shook his head. Not without physical access to that specific device. It's not connecting through our systems. They watched as Phillips spoke briefly, then destroyed the phone, removing the battery and SIM card, breaking them separately before flushing the pieces. That's not standard corporate procedure, Dominic noted dryly. No, Levi agreed. That's the behavior of someone with something significant to hide. He checked his watch. I think it's time we welcome Mr. Phillips properly. Have Teresa bring him to the Cliffside Conference Room in 15 minutes. The Cliffside Conference Room occupied a spectacular position on the resort's most dramatic overlook. 3 walls of glass created the illusion of floating above the Pacific, while state-of-the-art security features ensured absolute privacy. It was where Levi conducted his most sensitive negotiations, and where every conversation was recorded from multiple concealed locations. Phillips arrived prompt to the minute, dressed in a fresh suit despite the early hour. His expression registered appreciation for the dramatic setting before settling into practiced neutrality. Impressive location, Westbrook, he commented, declining the offered coffee. Though I imagine the construction challenges were substantial. Nothing worthwhile comes easily, Levi replied, studying his opponent. Phillips had the flush of a man running on adrenaline and ambition rather than sleep. What brings you to Sapphire Cove with such urgency, Mason? I don't recall having a meeting scheduled. Phillips smiled thinly. Circumstances change. I assumed you'd want to discuss the Baxter situation directly, given our mutual interests. Mutual interests? Levi raised an eyebrow. That's an interesting characterization, considering your collaboration with Hammond to undermine my position. If Phillips was surprised by this direct acknowledgement, he didn't show it. Business is business, Levi. Hammond approached us with information. We evaluated its potential utility. Nothing personal. Corporate espionage rarely is, Levi agreed mildly. Though using my wife as an access point did add a certain personal dimension. Phillips waved this aside. Ancient history now. The landscape has changed significantly in the past 48 hours. I'm here to discuss moving forward, not looking backward. Forward to what, exactly? A strategic partnership. Phillips leaned forward, his expression turning serious. The Baxter empire is collapsing. Their properties will be liquidated at fire sale prices. Between Mirage and Platinum, we could control the most valuable assets on both coasts. Levi studied Phillips with genuine curiosity. You're proposing we collaborate after you attempted to orchestrate my financial destruction? I'm proposing we recognize reality, Phillips countered. The Baxters are finished. Preston's in critical condition, Vivian's facing potential fraud charges, and the vultures are circling their portfolio. You've won that battle decisively. And Hammond? Where does he fit in this new partnership? A flicker of something, annoyance, perhaps concern, crossed Phillips' face. Hammond is no longer a factor. His usefulness ended with his exposure. Yet you personally escorted him to Phoenix on your private jet just hours ago, Levi noted. Quite considerate treatment for a disposable asset. Phillips paused, clearly reassessing the extent of Levi's intelligence gathering. A courtesy to a former associate, he said finally. Nothing more. The conversation was interrupted by a discreet knock. Teresa entered with an envelope, which she handed to Levi. This just arrived by courier, sir. Marked urgent. Levi opened the envelope and scanned its contents, his expression revealing nothing. Thank you, Teresa. Please prepare the conference call system. I'll need to connect with our Singapore team in 20 minutes. After Teresa departed, Levi returned his attention to Phillips. Interesting timing. It seems the Coastal Commission has just announced an emergency review of all development applications for the former Baxter properties. Something about environmental concerns requiring heightened scrutiny. Phillips couldn't fully mask his reaction, a tightening around the eyes, a subtle tension in his shoulders. Bureaucratic delay tactics. It won't affect the underlying transactions. Perhaps not, but it will extend the timeline significantly. Environmental reviews can take months, even years, during which financing costs accumulate, market conditions change. Levi left the implications hanging. Phillips abandoned his casual posture, leaning forward aggressively. Let's cut through the bullshit, Westbrook. You orchestrated this review, just like you orchestrated the banking freeze on Baxter accounts. You're blocking our acquisition because you want those properties for yourself. I'm simply exercising appropriate caution regarding valuable assets, Levi replied evenly, as any prudent businessman would. Bullshit, Phillips snapped. This is personal now. First Hammond, now this. Levi's expression hardened. You made it personal when you targeted my wife and my company. Did you really think there wouldn't be consequences? Phillips stood abruptly. This isn't over. You may have won this round, but what? Levi interrupted, remaining seated. You'll try another approach? Perhaps another inside man? Or something more direct? The tension between them crystallized into something dangerous. Be careful, Westbrook, Phillips warned quietly. You're playing a game with rules you don't fully understand. On the contrary, Levi replied. I understand perfectly that there are no rules. Only winners and losers. And you, Mason, are not accustomed to losing. Phillips stared at him for a long moment before turning to leave. At the door, he paused. You should check on your wife. I hear she's having a difficult time adjusting to her new circumstances. The implied threat hung in the air as Phillips departed. Levi immediately contacted Dominic. Where's Audrey? Still at Seabreeze Villa. No movement since last night. Visual confirmation? Checking now. There was a pause before Dominic continued, his voice suddenly alert. Security feed shows the villa appears empty. Last confirmed visual was at 23:42 last night. Send a team immediately, Levi ordered, already moving toward the door. And locate Hammond. Phillips' threat wasn't random. 15 minutes later, Levi arrived at the Seabreeze Villa to find Dominic coordinating a security team. The villa showed no signs of struggle or forced entry, but Audrey was nowhere to be found. Her phone remained on the nightstand, her purse on the counter. Only her car was missing from the garage. Traffic cameras? Levi asked. Nothing yet, Dominic reported. The coastal highway has limited coverage. We're checking gas stations and toll points within a 50-mile radius. As they continued the search, Levi received an encrypted message from an unknown number. When opened, it displayed a photo of Audrey in what appeared to be a motel room, looking frightened but unharmed. The message below was simple: exchange terms to follow. Stay available. Levi showed the message to Dominic. Trace it. Already working on it. Preliminary location shows somewhere near San Bernardino, but it's being routed through multiple servers. Hammond, Levi concluded. This is why Phillips dropped him in Phoenix. Not to dispose of him, but to position him for this move. But why involve Mrs. Westbrook now? The Baxter assets are already in play. Levi's expression darkened as the pieces fell into place. Because this isn't about the assets anymore. It's about something Hammond took from the Baxters that Phillips needs, something important enough to risk a kidnapping. They returned to the security center, where Levi reviewed all surveillance footage of Hammond during his time at Sapphire Cove. One interaction stood out. A brief conversation with Vivian Baxter in a secluded corner of the garden, the day before the confrontational dinner. Vivian had handed Hammond a small object that he quickly pocketed. Enhance and stabilize that section, Levi instructed the technician. The enhanced image revealed what appeared to be a small hardware key, similar to those used for secure digital vaults. The Baxter encryption key, Levi realized. It would grant access to all their secure financial data, authentication codes, offshore account details, everything needed to access hidden assets. Which explains Phillips' urgency, Dominic concluded. If he can access those accounts before the banks freeze them completely, he could siphon hundreds of millions before anyone realizes, Levi finished. And Hammond is using Audrey as leverage to negotiate his position with Phillips. Another message arrived. Keystone Motel, Room 114, San Bernardino. Come alone with $5 million cash equivalent. 3 hours. No police. Levi showed Dominic the message. Prepare the helicopter. And contact Judge Abernathy. We'll need his assistance for what comes next. 3 hours later, Levi arrived at the Keystone Motel, a dingy, 2-story structure off the interstate. Instead of the requested cash, he carried a briefcase containing very different contents. 2 unmarked vehicles were positioned strategically in the parking lot, containing Dominic and his team. Room 114 was on the ground floor, its curtains drawn. Levi knocked precisely 3 times. The door opened a crack, revealing Hammond's tense face. Show me the money first. Let me see Audrey, Levi countered. Hammond hesitated, then opened the door wider. Audrey sat on the bed, her hands bound with zip ties, a bruise forming on her cheek. Her eyes widened at the sight of Levi. I'm sorry, she whispered. He was waiting in the garage. It's all right, Levi assured her, then turned to Hammond. You've made a serious miscalculation, Richard. Hammond flinched at the use of his real name. Just give me the money. Then you can take her and go. That's not how this ends, Levi said calmly. The police are outside. So is my security team. The motel is surrounded. Hammond's expression contorted with desperation. He pulled out a gun, pointing it shakily at Audrey. You're lying. I checked for tails. Not police cars. Judge Abernathy signed the warrant personally an hour ago. The officers are in unmarked vehicles. Levi set the briefcase on the small table. Inside is evidence of your financial crimes, copies of your communications with Phillips, and a signed statement from Vivian Baxter regarding the encryption key you stole. Hammond's face paled. You're bluffing. The deal Phillips offered you is already void. Levi continued as if Hammond hadn't spoken. He never intended to share the Baxter assets with you. You were always disposable. The only question was when. Shut up, Hammond shouted, his hand trembling. You don't know anything. I know Phillips has already cut off communication. I know the number you've been texting hasn't responded in over an hour. I know you're alone now, with no exit strategy. Hammond's eyes darted frantically between Levi and Audrey. I still have her, he said desperately. That's worth something. Yes, Levi agreed. It is. Which is why I'm offering you an alternative. He opened the briefcase, revealing not money but a single folder and a passport. Inside is documentation for a new identity, prepaid accounts totaling $500,000, and a one-way ticket to Malaysia, departing tonight. No extradition treaty, no financial tracking. Hammond stared at the contents, visibly torn. Why would you help me escape? I'm not helping you escape, Levi clarified. I'm helping you disappear. Once you leave this room, Richard Hamlin no longer exists. Reed Hammond never existed at all. You'll live as someone else, somewhere else, permanently. And if I refuse, then what's outside this door becomes your reality instead. The moment stretched as Hammond considered his options. Finally, his shoulders slumped in defeat. He lowered the gun and moved to cut Audrey's restraints. The key, Levi demanded. Where is it? Hammond reached into his pocket and produced the small device Vivian had given him. It's useless without the passcodes, he said as he handed it over. Vivian provided those as part of her cooperation agreement, Levi informed him. Her testimonial immunity was quite comprehensive. As Audrey stood, rubbing her wrists, Hammond gathered the folder and passport from the briefcase. Why this option? He asked quietly. Why not just let them arrest me? Because your public trial would harm Audrey, Levi answered honestly. And she's suffered enough for other people's ambitions. Hammond nodded once, understanding the complex mixture of mercy and punishment in Levi's approach. The car keys are on the dresser, he said to Audrey. I'm sorry about. He gestured vaguely toward her bruised face. Just go, she replied, her voice hollow. Become someone else. Someone better. After Hammond departed through the back exit, where an unmarked car would follow him discreetly to ensure he boarded his flight, Levi and Audrey stood in awkward silence. You came for me, she finally said. After everything. Yes. Why? Levi considered the question carefully. Because endings matter, he said at last. They define what came before. She stepped toward him, close enough that he could smell the familiar scent of her perfume beneath the motel's staleness. And what is this ending, Levi? What does it define? He met her gaze directly. The end of what we were, not the beginning of something else. Understanding passed between them, a recognition that some bridges, once burned, cannot be rebuilt. What remained was acknowledgement, not reconciliation. Thank you, she said simply, for not being the monster they tried to make you. Even monsters have their codes, he replied. Mine just happens to include finishing what others start. As they left the motel together, walking apart, not touching, Levi received a final message from Dominic. Phillips in custody. Financial Crimes Unit served warrants at Platinum HQ. Operation complete. The last piece had fallen into place. Mason Phillips, caught attempting to access the Baxter hidden accounts with the stolen encryption key, now faced federal charges. The Platinum Hospitality stock was already plummeting in after-hours trading. Levi had not only protected himself, he had systematically dismantled everyone who had conspired against him. The Baxter Empire, Platinum Hospitality, Hammond, Phillips, all had underestimated the architect of vengeance, a man who had built his life anticipating betrayal and preparing for it with meticulous precision. As they drove back toward Sapphire Cove in separate vehicles, Levi watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of retribution, deep crimson fading to unforgiving black. Chapter 9. Foundations of Ash. 6 months after the events at Sapphire Cove, Levi stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his New York penthouse, watching snow drift over Central Park. The city sprawled before him, a concrete empire so different from his coastal resorts, yet governed by the same principles of power and consequence. The aftermath of what financial media now called the Baxter collapse had reshaped the hospitality landscape. Mirage Resorts had acquired key Baxter properties at advantageous prices, while Platinum Hospitality had been broken up and sold to international investors following Mason Phillips' indictment on multiple federal charges. Preston Baxter had survived his stroke but remained in long-term care, his once formidable mind diminished to childlike simplicity. Vivian, facing her own legal challenges, had accepted a plea deal that included testimony against Phillips and significant financial penalties. Their social standing, once unassailable, had evaporated overnight. The intercom chimed, interrupting Levi's reflections. Mr. Westbrook, your 3 o'clock appointment has arrived. Send them up, Levi instructed. Minutes later, Audrey entered the penthouse, accompanied by her attorney. 6 months had changed her. She appeared thinner, her designer outfit more subdued, her once perfect makeup minimal. Yet she carried herself with a dignity that transcended circumstance. Thank you for agreeing to meet, she said formally after her attorney had been shown to an adjacent room to give them privacy. Of course, Levi replied, gesturing toward the seating area. Can I offer you something? No, thank you. This won't take long. They sat across from each other, the ghost of their marriage hanging between them. Divorce proceedings had been surprisingly straightforward. Levi had offered terms more generous than legally required, and Audrey had accepted without negotiation. I'm relocating to Europe, she announced. Milan, specifically. I've been offered a position with a design firm there. Levi nodded. A fresh start. Something like that. She hesitated before continuing. Before I go, I wanted to return this. She removed a small box from her purse and placed it on the table between them. Inside was her engagement ring, a rare blue diamond that Levi had specially commissioned. This belongs to you, she said. It never felt right keeping it. Levi studied the ring without touching it. Consider it part of your settlement. Sell it if you need additional resources for your new life. I don't want anything else from you, Levi. The divorce settlement was more than fair. The directness of her statement hung in the air between them. Have you heard from Hammond? Levi asked, changing the subject. Audrey shook her head. No. Has he surfaced? There were rumors of someone matching his description in Kuala Lumpur briefly, but nothing since. He appears to have taken the disappearing act seriously. And Phillips, facing 20 years, minimum. His cooperation agreement wasn't nearly as advantageous as Vivian's. Audrey absorbed this information silently. My father is being moved to a specialized facility in Switzerland next month, she finally said. The doctors say the change might stimulate some cognitive improvement. I heard. The facility has an excellent reputation. She looked at him sharply. You've been keeping tabs on us. Information is still currency, Levi replied simply. A silence fell between them, not entirely uncomfortable, but weighted with unspoken recognitions. Was any of it real? Audrey finally asked. Us, I mean. Or was I always just a strategic acquisition? The question cut closer than Levi expected. It was real, he answered honestly. Until it wasn't. When did it change for you? When did it change for you? He countered. Audrey considered the question with surprising candor. When my mother convinced me you would never belong in our world. That eventually you'd resent me for what I represented. Old money, established power, everything you had to fight for. And you believed her. I let myself believe her, Audrey corrected. Because it was easier than acknowledging that I was jealous of your success. Success you achieved without the advantages I'd taken for granted my entire life. The admission surprised him. In all their years together, Audrey had never acknowledged this underlying current in their relationship. For what it's worth, she continued, Hammond was a mistake born from that insecurity. I convinced myself he understood both worlds, that he could bridge what I saw as a growing gap between us. When in reality, he understood neither, Levi observed. Just how to exploit the insecurities in both. Audrey nodded, a sad smile touching her lips. We were both manipulated by someone who saw our weaknesses more clearly than we saw each other's. The honesty of the moment created a curious intimacy, not romantic or reconciliatory, but a shared recognition of mutual blindness. I didn't come here seeking forgiveness, Audrey said after a moment. Or offering it, for that matter. What happened can't be undone or absolved. No, Levi agreed. It can't. But I wanted you to know that I understand now why you built your life the way you did. Why you created layers of protection that even I couldn't penetrate. The world taught you lessons I was privileged enough to ignore. Levi considered her words carefully. We all build fortresses against our particular fears, Audrey. Mine were just more literal than most. She stood, signaling the end of their meeting. Goodbye, Levi. I hope you find what you're looking for. As she moved toward the door, Levi remained seated. What makes you think I'm still looking for something? Audrey paused, turning back with unexpected insight. Because you won. Completely. You destroyed everyone who betrayed you. You expanded your empire. You emerged stronger than before. She met his gaze directly. And yet you're still alone in this tower, watching the world from a safe distance. The observation landed with uncomfortable precision. Levi said nothing as Audrey departed, leaving him with the ring on the table and the snow falling silently beyond the glass. Later that evening, Levi received a call from Dominic. Sir, we've received confirmation on the Hammond situation. Go ahead. Malaysian authorities found a body matching his biometrics in a hotel room in Penang. Apparent suicide, though there are inconsistencies in the scene. Philip's reach is longer than we anticipated, Levi concluded. Any connection traceable to him? Nothing direct. The local investigation is being handled as a routine overdose. Ensure the family is notified discreetly, Levi instructed, and arrange appropriate financial support for Hammond's father in Idaho. Already done, sir. After ending the call, Levi poured himself a measure of rare whiskey and returned to the window. The city lights blurred through the falling snow, creating an illusion of stars fallen to earth. In the reflection of the glass, he could see the solitary figure he presented, exactly as Audrey had described. His phone buzzed with a message from Teresa. Sapphire Cove expansion approved unanimously by Coastal Commission. Construction can begin immediately. Another victory. Another expansion. Another step in building an empire designed to withstand any attack. Yet Audrey's words echoed uncomfortably. You're still alone in this tower, watching the world from a safe distance. Levi set down his glass and made a decision. He contacted his pilot to prepare the jet, then instructed his assistant to clear his schedule for the next week. Revenge had been necessary, a matter of survival as much as justice. But survival alone was no longer sufficient. The fortresses he had built to protect himself had become barriers to something else, something he had forgotten to value during his relentless pursuit of security. As the snow continued to fall, Levi Westbrook considered the foundations of his empire, built not just on concrete and steel, but on the ashes of those who had underestimated him. It was an empire designed to endure, to stand against any storm. But even the most perfect fortress could become a prison if its architect never ventured beyond its walls. The question that remained was whether he could find the courage to build something new, something not designed solely for protection, but for possibility, something not constructed from suspicion, but from the very trust he had learned was so dangerous. The answer would not come tonight, perhaps not for many nights to come, but for the first time since the betrayal, Levi allowed himself to consider that revenge, while necessary, was not sufficient. That destroying what threatened him was not the same as creating what might sustain him. As he prepared to leave the tower that had become both his triumph and his isolation, Levi left the engagement ring on the table, a glittering remnant of a connection that had failed. Not because loving was impossible, but because it required a vulnerability neither of them had been prepared to risk. The empire remained, the architect endured, and the foundations, built from both triumph and ash, awaited whatever he might choose to construct upon them next. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.